Are you ready?
"20 years ago, my mother and my stepfather were living in Little Rock, Arkansas. And while they were living there, they purchased a piece of property in the Ozark Mountains a few hours from where they lived as sort of a weekend getaway. The small rustic house that stood on the property had been owned by a pastor and his wife. And while they owned it, the pastor and his sons had built a house on the property with their very own hands. They would spend a few weeks each summer putting together this house. Eventually, the pastor fell ill and was unable to continue working on the house, and he and his wife were unable to actually visit the property. So he actually sold it to my parents. Now, to say that the house was rustic is really barely doing it justice. It was a shanty. It looked like a Frankenstein home. It was put together with like spare parts. It was incomplete. To be truthful, it didn't look a lot different than a lot of the other hillbilly houses that you'd find in the Ozark Mountains, but this wasn't fit for living in. It was fine for camping. It might have actually been a step below tent camping, if you want to know the truth, because while you were sharing this house with your family members, as you stayed there, you were also sharing it with all kinds of other critters that had made their way in over the course of the winter months. The first visit that I made to this property, I went and I was visiting my parents, and my brother, who was a couple years younger than me, was also visiting. And we got to the property, and we saw this thing, and we both busted a gut laughing. My stepfather had been telling us about this cabin that he'd bought. And it wasn't much of a cabin, but we had a nice chest full of beer and a weekend to do nothing, so we decided to kick back and just make the best of the time that we could. Somewhere along the weekend, though, we discovered that the stairs that led up to the main entrance of the house, the wood had started to rot. And they were actually very unstable, almost dangerously unstable. And so my brother and I began to root around and see if we could find some scrap wood and some materials that we could use to repair these stairs. Now, my mother had only been married to my stepfather, Nate, for a couple of years. And we really didn't know him very well, and he didn't really know my brother and me very well. And I suppose that there was a moment of sort of, sibling rivalry, a little bit of posturing going on to see which one of us could impress our new stepfather the most. And if you know anything about my handyman skills, you know that it's a far stretch, because I'm not a handyman. But we decided that we were going to try to fix these stairs, and it wasn't long into the repair job that our project hit a snag. The snag was that my brother had one idea about how to do the job, and I had a different idea about how to do the job. And it wasn't long that this snag and this difference of opinions in how to repair the job had turned into a full-blown shouting match with expletives flying and 2x4s flying and the stairs actually being completely wrecked in the process. I was doing all that I could to keep from punching my brother in the mouth to shut him up. I was mad. He was mad. My mom was mad, and she was embarrassed. And my poor stepfather, Nate, standing off the side, wondering what kind of family he had married into. I felt bad for him. I don't know if he ever asked us to fix the stairs, but he inferred that we ought to, and maybe he was regretting that. It's actually a miracle that neither of us threw a punch and hit each other. It was that heated. That's how hot the argument got. Now, Michael and I had not been in a fist fight at that point for many years. We were in our early 20s, and it had probably been our maybe early teens since the last time we'd actually punched one another. But it wasn't unusual in our household growing up. When my brother and I faced some sort of conflict, it usually ended up on the ground. That's where it went. Started upright, usually ended up on the ground. Now, I was 2.5 years older than Michael, so I usually wound up on top. Unless he decided to wield a weapon, like a shovel or a fireplace poker, and then the odds would turn to his favor pretty quickly. It's interesting that as I look back on our childhood and the way that Michael and I often resolved our conflict, it typically was a physical altercation. That was the way we resolved our conflict with one another. Now, interestingly, my parents, my mother and father, who lived in the same house, we never saw them fight. It wasn't that they didn't fight. They just certainly didn't fight the same way my brother and I did, but they didn't argue in front of us. We didn't ever see them get heated with one another. We could tell when something was going on, when somebody was mad at somebody. You know, there was a whole lot of cold shoulder stuff going on. And I guess when you look at that dynamic of 4 people living in a household and you see the differences and the different ways that we all handle that conflict, it kind of stands as evidence that everyone deals with conflict in a different way. It's obvious that we didn't necessarily handle it in a very constructive way. Obviously, punching each other's lights out is not the way you should solve your conflict. But the fact that my parents ended up divorced is probably a pretty good indication that they weren't necessarily handling the conflict in their marriage very well either. Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families, writes that good families, even great families, are off track 90% of the time. Now, as I read that, I'll just say, a lot of people make up a lot of statistics, and that's probably one that's made up, 90%. I think my own family, my nuclear family that lives in my household now is my wife, Elizabeth, and my 2 sons, Silas, who's 11, and Ephraim, who's 10. We're a pretty good family. I wouldn't say we're a great family, but we do all right. I wouldn't say that we're off track 90% of the time. I wouldn't say we're off track 80 or 70 or 60. 50% of the time, maybe that's a little bit more realistic. But I'll tell you what, the 50% of the time that we are off track really wrecks the 50% of the time that we are on track. It seems like an uphill battle. It seems like when you're off track, you're way off track. And it makes it very difficult to manage relationships when they're off track, get as far off track as they are. It actually takes the fun out of the times when we are on track. Now, as we begin this new series today, Ultimate Family Challenges, I want to start by just welcoming you. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us here. Whether you are here at the Galaxy in person or if you're watching online or listening on the internet, if you're a regular part of Grasslands Church, if this is your church family, or if you're just checking things out today because it's back to church Sunday, or because maybe somebody invited you, or maybe because you're looking for some new ways to navigate conflict in your household. Either way, we're really glad that you're here with us. This series is going to be 4 messages long. Today will, by and large, be an introduction to the series. And I'm just going to forewarn you before we even get going that you are likely to leave today with more unanswered questions than answered questions, okay? It's just the way things are going to be. When we package our series here at Grasslands, we do so in series, meaning each week is kind of connected to the next. This one's 4 parts long. So if you really want to maximize this series, you need to be with us for 4 weeks, 4 Sundays. Now, obviously, if you have something that comes up or you're unable to be here for one of the 4 weeks, make sure that you click onto our website and you can download the audio, you can listen to it online, you can watch the video online, and you can get yourself caught up if you happen to miss a week. If you've got somebody in your family who you feel like needs to hear what's being said here, maybe there's somebody you were trying to get to come to church with you today and they refused to come, pop a bag of popcorn, open a bag of Skittles, fire it up on the computer in the living room, and make a movie night out of it or something. Do something, okay? But get it into the hands and onto the computers of people that you know that would be able to benefit from this. Any discussion that we have about family is complicated by the fact that we all experience family in a completely different way. You may be a blended family. You may be in your second marriage or your third marriage. You might be in between marriages. It could be that you're raising your kids alone. It could be that you're raising somebody else's kids. Maybe you're parenting adopted children or foster children in your home. Or it could be that you're a grandparent and you have some responsibilities of helping to raise your own children's children. The spectrum of family life and the way that we draw it up is very complicated. Your situation is not like anybody else's situation. Now, some of you haven't been to church for a while. You've come back to church after some absence, or maybe some of you have never been to church at all. Some of you here are people that are regular church goers. You actually have even read the Bible, or at least parts of it. you kind of believe it or want to believe it. Some of you are following Jesus in your life. You know, there's a broad spectrum of people represented in this room. But none of that really matters. The differences in our background, the differences in our family life, the differences in our faith background really don't matter at this point. You need to know, though, that as a church, we're going to take our primary teaching cues on how to resolve conflict in our family from the Bible. This is our primary source. There are other sources that we look at and other things that we can learn from, but the Bible is our primary source of instruction. As we explore the process of being families that manage conflict in a constructive way, the biblical principles that we're going to unpack here are both universal and timeless. That means that it doesn't matter what you know or don't know about the Bible. It doesn't matter what you believe or disbelieve about Jesus. None of that really matters because the principles that we're going to look at apply to any family, anytime, anywhere. That's what makes them universal and timeless. Now, again, because there's such a broad spectrum of family portraits here, we know that everybody's coming from a different place. But that being said, there are a couple of things that I know are absolutely true about everyone here. Okay? The first thing that I know that is true about you is that you're the smartest person you know. In fact, you're so smart that if everybody in your household would do what you told them to do, you'd resolve 99.9% of the conflict in your house right there. And I'm only giving you 1/10 wiggle room because you're smart enough to know that you're not going to get it right every time. Once in a blue moon, you might not get it right. So that's one thing that I know is true about you. You are the smartest person you know. The second thing that I know that is true about you is that if you live under a roof in some sort of dwelling with another human being, regardless of how they're related to you, you are going to experience some degree of conflict in your household. It is impossible for two people to live under a roof without at some time having some degree of conflict. Now, some of you have like 8, 10, 12 people living under your roof. If you've got that many people living under your roof, you're probably facing quite a bit of conflict on a regular basis. But that doesn't mean that you're experiencing it any more than just a young married couple or a empty nester couple, because we all experience conflict when we reside with another human being. And, the conflict that you face or the conflict that you're looking to deal with might be conflict between you and one other person in your house. Maybe you live in a house with 4 or 5 other people or more. Maybe the conflict is between you and one other person, and there's just some real struggles, some real challenges there. Or maybe the conflict that you need help navigating is actually not between you and another person, it's between 2 other people. And you see the conflict happening between those 2 other people, and you don't know how to help them resolve it. You were the one with the referee shirt on when you were taking the family portrait out there in the lobby, right? Because you know you need to referee, but you're not really sure what to do about it. Either way, regardless of where that conflict applies in your household, all of us need to learn how to deal with our conflict constructively. Constructively handling our conflict builds our family up. The word constructive and construction come from the same root, right? When we're constructing something, we're building something. We're making it stronger. We want to make it more beautiful by building it up. So we want to learn to constructively handle our conflict. The opposite of doing it constructively is destructively. Same root word as destroy, right? And you really break down your family unit. You break down the unity in your home. You break down the health in your home when you fail to navigate the waters of conflict in a constructive way. And that's what we're going to be aiming to do, is to learn to deal with things constructively so we can live more peacefully with our family members. Back in July of this summer, my son Silas and I flew to Washington, D.C. for a church conference. Our route of travel was to fly from Medicine Hat to Calgary, from Calgary to Toronto, and Toronto to D.C. It was going to be a long day, 11 hours of travel. We left at 5 o'clock in the morning from Medicine Hat. We were expecting to land in D.C. at 6 p.m., which gave us 1 hour to get from the airport to the hotel where our conference was taking place. The first leg of our flight from Medicine Hat to Calgary went smoothly, but then shortly after we took off from Calgary, about an hour, maybe hour and a half into our flight from Calgary to Toronto, the captain came on line to inform us that the toilets in the plane were not flushing. And no one on board knew how to hit the reset button to fix the lavatories. And apparently, planes can't fly from Calgary to Toronto if the toilets aren't flushing. Probably not a bad thing. So they informed us that they were going to reroute us to Winnipeg, put us on the ground for a half hour in Winnipeg so someone could come and push the reset button, reset the toilets so they would flush again, and then we would be on our way. Well, of course, as the flight and the process was unfolding, this 30-minute landing in Winnipeg turned into 60 minutes, turned into 90 minutes. Meanwhile, I'm looking at our itinerary, realizing there's no way we're making our connecting flight in Toronto to get to Washington, D.C. To make matters worse, we had to go through customs when we got into Toronto, which is a nightmare in and of itself. We got through customs. We had a long layover there. They rerouted us on another flight. We were again expected to land at 6 p.m. We ended up landing in D.C. at about midnight. Things were then further compounded because we had actually planned to take the subway from the airport to our hotel. And because it was after midnight when we landed, we actually had to take a taxi, which cost us about 5 times the money that it would have cost had we just taken the subway. Obviously, we ultimately arrived at our destination. Better late than never. Now, I have a purpose for sharing this story with you, and it has nothing to do with whether or not you book your next travel plans with an airline that rhymes with snare Blanada. But that's beside the point. What I want you to think about as we go through this series is, I didn't hide that very well, did I? What I want you to start thinking about is thinking about your family in terms of a journey, in terms of something that's going somewhere. Most of the time we think about our family as being kind of a static thing. This is our family, and it's static until you have one of your kids graduates from high school and moves out. And now all of a sudden you realize it wasn't static. Or you lose a loved one in your home, and you realize it wasn't static. Or until your spouse decides they don't want to live with you anymore. And then you realize it's not static. Our family life, our home life is not static. It is something that is in perpetual motion. And we need to think about our family life in terms of a journey with a clear destination. If you were going to book a flight like we did to Washington, D.C., you want to know that there's a specific takeoff time and a specific landing time, and that they're taking off from a specific location and you're landing at a very specific destination. When you get on board the plane, the pilot has already filed a flight plan. And that flight plan tells when we're taking off, when we're landing, and the GPS coordinates of when we're turning, the altitude that we're going to be flying. Everything is already set out in motion. Now, that being said, there are things that can interfere with that flight plan, such as the toilets in life just stop flushing, and the next thing you know, you're filling up with crap. And you've got to find a place to unload. You've got to get help to push the reset button, right? And so you may have to take a detour. You may have to take an unplanned landing. But your final destination doesn't change. You may not get where you were planning to go at the time that you were expecting to get there, but you ultimately get there. Now, if you saved your money all year and planned to fly to Hawaii for a vacation, and you got on the plane, and the pilot comes on and says, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain, and just letting you know that we're going to be climbing to an altitude today of about 32,000 feet. And when we get to 32,000 feet, we're just going to go where the jet stream takes us. And if we ever get close enough to Hawaii to land, we'll let you know. You'd bolt for the door, right? I'd not pay my money to go into the airstream, the jet stream, and let the winds take me where they want to take me. You'd make a beeline for the door. You'd get off that plane. You know, if you were building a house, you wouldn't take your truck over to Rona this afternoon, load it up with a bunch of 2x4s and drywall, and go dump it somewhere and start hammering pieces together. I'm no construction guy, but I know better than that. You start with a blueprint. You want drawings. You want to know what the finished product is going to look like. You want to know what you're trying to build. If you don't know what you're trying to build, how will you ever know what the parts and the pieces are that you need in order to assemble it? How will you ever know if you're on task, if you're actually headed in the right direction? How will you ever manage the cost? How will you ever know if you've arrived if you don't have a blueprint for what you're trying to build. The same thing is true in our family life. In order for us to really know where we're headed, we need a flight plan. We need a destination. We need to know where we're going. We need a blueprint. We need to know what this thing is supposed to look like so that we know what pieces we need to start assembling it. We need to know when we're making progress. We need to know when we're spending too much on certain areas that are not helping us get to our final destination. If you choose to just go with the flow, you're really making a fatal error for your family. In fact, I'll say that it's really, really difficult to have hope. It's really difficult to sustain a family life in a healthy way if you're just going with the flow. It won't work. When we read the Bible, as I mentioned, this is where we take our cues. So, one might be tempted to open up the Bible and say, okay, let's find a blueprint here. Let's find a family that we can model our family life after. And so you might start reading about all the different families in the Bible. And the truth of the matter is, there aren't really very many good families in the Bible. Most of them, even the famous ones, are more jacked up than your family is. Adam and Eve, they had a couple of kids named Cain and Abel. Didn't turn out very well because one brother killed the other brother. Our first recorded instance of homicide, first murder. One brother killed another. Don't model yourself after that family. Joseph, the guy with the amazing Technicolor dream coat, you probably heard of him. His brothers sold him into slavery. First recorded incident of human trafficking. David, who was the king of Israel, the greatest king that ever lived, man after God's own heart. His son rebelled against him and started the first civil war in Israel. Father against son, a civil war. There's another one you don't want to model after. We can fast forward to the New Testament, and we can go to the first family of the Bible. Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus. How did they do? Well, Jesus was a little boy. Mary and Joseph went to Jerusalem to worship at the Passover. And after the Passover festival was over, they left and started heading back home to Nazareth. They were on the road for a full day before they realized they didn't have Jesus with them. They'd lost the Messiah. How do you lose God? They managed to do it. 3 days later, they found him. Not a very good example of parenting if you want to know the truth. So as we look at the Bible, what do we learn? How can we learn about what a family is supposed to look like? You know what? There are a lot of examples about how to not do things. That being said, there are some very important pieces of instruction on how to have the ultimate family. Much to the surprise of many people, Jesus' primary teachings are not about heaven and hell. Jesus' primary teachings are not about religion. Jesus' primary teachings are about relationships. How to have a healthy relationship with God, how to restore a broken relationship with God and walk with Him, and then how to have healthy relationships with people in your life. Other people who are following God, other people who are far away from God. That's really the crux of Jesus' primary teaching. And so as the first texts of the Bible were being written, there were some guys named Paul and Peter and Luke and Mark and Matthew. These guys were writing stuff. They didn't know it was going to end up in the Bible. There was no such thing as the Bible when they were writing it. But a lot of the stuff that they were writing about was expounding on Jesus' teachings so that we could all, or those that were reading it then, and of course we can read it now, so that we could know better how to navigate this relationship with God, and then also how to navigate our relationships with one another. And so what we're going to read today and over the course of the next few weeks are some texts from the Bible that were actually expounded upon some of the things that Jesus said. We're going to read some things that Jesus said as well. I'm going to read you a few passages this morning. Before I read you these passages, though, there are a few things that you need to be aware of before we actually get into it. Because I think what we're looking at is a pretty clear blueprint for the ultimate family, but it might not seem that way when you first look at it. For starters, at the time that these things were written, they were revolutionary. They were game-changing things as they were being written. At the time that these instructions were being given, there was essentially one important person in every household. Dad, husband. He was the only one that mattered. The wife was valued slightly higher than the cattle he owned, and the kids were basically in the same ranks as the slaves or the servants in the house. Unless you happen to be the firstborn son. If you were the firstborn son, you had a little bit more favor, but you were still living under the iron thumb, iron rule, iron fist of the patriarch in the family. And that's the way that the family was instructed. But when Jesus started teaching things to be different, and as these writers explain the way that relationships are supposed to work, what was really happening was the status of wife and children was being elevated in the household. Okay? We're going to see this as we read through some of this text. The first passage I want to read is from a book called Ephesians, chapter 6, verse 1. It says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Can I get an amen from the back seat? Amen. The crowd goes wild. Let's go wild on that one. Come on, crowd. All right, that's a good one. We love that one. Don't we love that one? That one's awesome. Here's the next one. "Wives, submit to yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord." Cricket, cricket, cricket. Don't love that one so much, do you? Okay, here's the next one. "Husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them." Let's stop there for just a second. Love your wife. That seems pretty basic. What was revolutionary about that? Revolutionary. Well, because you're telling me I need to love my wife, and you don't understand where I got my wife. See, 2,000 years ago, my parents picked my wife for me. In fact, my parents picked my wife for me because there was another family in town who had 3 daughters, and nobody wanted to marry the middle daughter. Take a look at the middle daughter, and you'll understand why nobody wanted to marry the middle daughter. But this family also had a lot of goats, and my parents liked goats. So my parents made a deal with this family that if this family gave my parents a whole bunch of goats, then I would go and marry the girl. And so now you're telling me that I have to love and not treat harshly a wife that I didn't pick, that I'm not necessarily sure I even like. Yes, you've got to love her. Next one says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord." Again, children at this time were on the same level as the servants in the house. And the father wasn't necessarily always taking the responsibility to train them up in that discipline and teach them God's ways. And then the last one says, "In the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives." Honor? Honor? The goat girl? Honor? Yes, honor her. You have to honor the goat girl. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. See, this is game-changing for the family, okay? Because at this time, Jesus is basically saying, look, before God the Father, when you all get to heaven and you're bowing at the throne of Jesus Christ, there's no person more important than another. Father, husband, wife, mother, child, everyone is equal. This was a game changer at this time that it was being written. Let me summarize the ultimate family for you, okay? The ultimate family looks like this. Children do what their parents tell them to do. Husbands love their wives and treat them with honor. Wives submit to their husband. Fathers lead their children in God's way of living without stirring up conflict. Now we could all stand up, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya and be done. But I realize that for some of you, as you read these things, there's a little bit of tension growing. For starters, as you start thinking about this being the blueprint for the ultimate family, you might ask yourself the question, well, what if I don't have all those parts? What if my family doesn't have all those parts? Can I have the ultimate family? Or maybe you're processing the fact that while you might be willing to do your part in fulfilling your responsibility, you know there are other people in your household who aren't going to do theirs. And if they're not going to do theirs, maybe you're not quite so sure you want to do yours. Now, let's get one thing straight. In all of Jesus' teachings, there's a tension that exists between what's ideal, the ultimate family, and what's real. There's always a tension in Jesus' teachings. And the truth is, it's not a tension that we can ever fully alleviate. In fact, if you were going to go, what you're going to find over the course of the next few weeks is that there's tension or pressure in every aspect of family life, just like there is in a mixed martial arts fight. From the time the fighter enters the ring until somebody taps out or passes out or gets knocked out or the final bell sounds, there's tension. The fight always has tension in it. And the same thing is true in our family life. There's always going to be a certain level of tension that we have to learn how to manage. The goal is to try to figure out how to leverage that tension so that we can manage it and manage the conflict in a constructive way. Now, I'm going to leave you with one final visualization today of how this tension or this pressure works, and then I'm going to give you an assignment, okay? Now, when a mixed martial arts fighter prepares for a fight, a significant part of his preparation is to actually study his opponent, okay? Mixed martial arts is called mixed martial arts because every fighter has a different specialty in their discipline of fighting. Some are boxers, some are jiu-jitsu experts, some are wrestlers, some are kickboxers. Everybody has a different specialty skill. They get training in a lot of different areas, but everybody has a specialty. And so before you get into the ring with your opponent, you need to know what your opponent's specialty is. And so when I get into the octagon with another fighter, I need to know what they're going to be coming at me with. Because whatever they're good at is what they're going to apply pressure against me in. If I'm an expert kickboxer and my opponent is an expert wrestler, I got to know he's going to try to take me to the ground. Because if he takes me to the ground, number one, he's got the upper hand because he's a wrestler, and secondly, I can't be very effective on the ground if I'm a kickboxer. And so I need to be looking for what it is that he's coming at me with so that I'm prepared to defend against it and respond to it. As you get into the octagon, there are 750 square feet of area which your opponent is going to use to apply pressure. You cannot predict your opponent's moves. You don't know if they're going to go left, they're going to go right, they're going to come straight at you. You don't know what methods for sure they're going to employ to win that fight over you. You can't control what your opponent is doing at all. All you have control over is how you respond to the pressure that they are applying. And when you look at your family life, when you live in this defined space in which there is real pressure coming, all of that area, all of that pressure, all of that defined space is your concern. You're concerned with all of it. That area consists of all the family members living under your roof, maybe some that aren't living under your roof. And as you look at the qualities of the ultimate family, when you look at that blueprint and you process what each person should be doing in order for your family to live in that reality, you realize very quickly that you cannot control what they do. While their behavior and their conduct towards other family members is all your concern, and you need to be concerned about it all, it's not under your control. What you control is the space of your own response, your own attitude, your own behavior. That's your circle of influence. And so living in and managing that pressure that you feel coming in this entire area of concern, your whole octagon, it begins with you learning to manage the tension from the inside out. You start by controlling you. You start by controlling your own attitude, your own response, your own action. When you're in control of you, you don't give control to those that are applying the pressure. But when you give up control to those that are applying the pressure, you give away your joy, you give away your hope, you give away your happiness. You put it in their hands. What I believe is that you're going to begin to realize is that the more tension you begin managing from the inside out by controlling your own actions, your own attitude, your own behavior, that circle of influence will begin to grow. You'll begin to find that you minimize the space in which there's pressure. A fighter that's in control of the fight has more control of those 750 square feet. It doesn't really matter where he goes. He knows he's in control. He's got the upper hand. You begin to find that you will minimize the space in which you find the pressure. Now, some of you are kind of scratching your heads right now and you're wondering, okay, that's all good theory, but what do we do about this? What do we do next? Well, I told you you're going to be leaving today with more questions unanswered than answered. But I promise you, if you stick with us for the next 3 weeks, it will start to come clear. We're going to start talking about how we manage that pressure, how we respond appropriately, how we begin to grow our circle of influence in the ring. Now, everyone, when you came in today, you got an index card. And I want you to get that index card out right now. If you don't have a pen, don't sweat it. You can do this later. But I want you to get that index card out and hold it in your hand so I know you got it. If you didn't get one on your way in, make sure you get one on your way out. In preparation for combat in the world of mixed martial arts, there are two things that you need to know before you get into the ring. One, you need to know what your best chance of victory is in the fight. You need to know what's your best skill. What do you bring into the ring? How do you take advantage of your opponent? If your name's Ronda Rousey, you're looking for an arm bar. If you know Ronda Rousey, you know she rips people's arms out of the socket. I'm not proposing that any of you do that to any of your family members this week, regardless of how much you might feel like doing it. When you start thinking about your skills, I want you to think about this. What are you good at? What do you do in your home that's always a win? Are you a good listener? Are you good at helping people with their homework? You good at helping somebody with their piano lessons? Are you a good baker? Are you great at doing the dishes? What is it that you do that you bring to the ring that every time you do it, it gets a win? You know, every time I do this, maybe it's foot massages, I don't know, whatever it is. My wife's great at scrubbing the toilet. She is awesome at that. Nobody else in our house can do it as well as she does it, okay? Whatever it is that you do, that's a win every time. Write that down on one side of the card. On the reverse side of the card, what I want you to write down is that one thing that you know that happens in your house that always takes you down. What is it that takes you down? What are you the most susceptible to? Is it when he says this? Is it when she acts that way? Is it when they do this to each other? What is it? Now, you might have a laundry list of things, but I want you to pick one. That one thing that you know every single time it happens, I'm done. I blow my stack. I lose my temper. I want to walk out and leave. I am done. It takes me down every single time it happens. But you write those two things down on each side of those cards, and I want you to bring them back with you next week. Okay? Now, if you're going to bring somebody with you next week, you're going to share this video with somebody online, make sure that they do the assignment too, because it's going to be very important that we keep these cards with us for the next few weeks, because we're going to build on these things. We're going to learn from what it is those things are, that skill that you have, that thing that you do that always gets you a win, and that thing that you encounter in your home that always knocks you out. When we're together next week, I'm going to share with you one sentence, one statement that has the potential of changing everything in your household. You're not going to want to miss it. I'm going to pray. We're going to run a little video. When the video is done, you'll be free to go. Would you bow your heads with me? God, I want to thank you for just giving us families. Those of us who are privileged enough to have people that we get to experience and share life with and love on. And it's hard. We know it's hard. It's complicated. But we know that by the power of your Spirit, if we really tap into the way that you designed these families to work, then we can experience it in a much more fulfilling way. We can learn to navigate the waters of conflict and just be healthier people, healthier individuals, which will make up healthier families. And I pray that you bless each person here on their journey of discovering how to communicate and how to work better together in the context of their household. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.